The grand hall of the alien palace glowed under hundreds of floating lanterns. Their golden light reflected on the towering marble pillars and the polished black stone floor. Daniel stood near the edge, trying to make himself as small as possible among the crowd of alien nobles. Each one of them was twice his height, their armor gleaming, their movements graceful yet heavy with power. He was only there to repair a damaged translation beacon, but the palace guards had insisted he wait until the royal ceremony finished. He kept his eyes down, pretending to admire the intricate patterns on the floor, but curiosity got the better of him. His gaze drifted up, right to the tallest figure in the room. She stood near the queen's throne, her golden armor catching every glint of lantern light. She was the queen's eldest daughter, Arabella, and even among the giantess warriors, she looked formidable. Her long hair, braided with silver beads, fell over her shoulders. Her piercing violet eyes swept the hall like a predator scanning for prey. Daniel didn't know why, but the words slipped out before he could stop himself. "Your armor is magnificent," he said softly. He thought it was just a harmless compliment, something polite to say, but the effect was instant. The chatter in the hall died. Dozens of alien faces turned toward him. Even the musicians froze mid-note. Arabella's eyes locked onto his, her gaze sharp and unreadable. She stepped forward slowly, the sound of her armored boots echoing through the silence. Daniel felt his stomach tighten. Her shadow fell over him as she stopped just inches away, towering so high above that he had to tilt his head all the way back to see her face. Her lips curved into something between a smirk and a challenge. "Do you know the meaning of what you've just said, human?" Daniel blinked, unsure if he had misheard. "I was just being polite," he said carefully. Gasps rippled through the crowd. The queen's advisors whispered urgently to one another. One of them, a tall, stern-looking elder, stepped forward and addressed the queen in their native tongue. Daniel couldn't understand a word without the translation beacon, which was still broken. The queen rose from her throne. Her voice boomed across the hall, and a younger scribe hurried over to translate for him using a small handheld device. "By the law of binding words," the scribe said, "you have declared a vow before the royal court. You have spoken of the princess's war armor in the presence of witnesses. This is a challenge of worthiness. You must now prove you deserve the honor of such words." Daniel's jaw went slack. "Wait, what? I didn't." Two massive guards stepped to his sides, not roughly, but firmly enough to make it clear he wasn't going anywhere. Arabella's smirk deepened. She tilted her head slightly, studying him as if he were some curious animal. "You will not refuse," she said, her voice steady but filled with certainty. "The law binds you, and I am eager to see if a human can survive what comes next." Daniel tried to speak again, but the queen raised her hand and the hall erupted into ceremonial chants. Heavy drums pounded from the far end of the chamber. Alien nobles struck their spears against the floor in a rhythmic beat. The sound vibrated through his chest. A ceremonial collar of woven gold and leather was placed around his neck. It was surprisingly light, but the weight of what it symbolized made his hands tremble. The elder who had spoken before leaned in just enough for Daniel to hear. "Once the vow is spoken, there is no escape. If you fail, you will be sent away in shame. If you refuse, you will not leave this hall alive." Daniel's mind raced. All he had done was try to be polite, and now he was being forced into some alien ritual he didn't understand. Every pair of eyes in the hall was on him. Arabella turned sharply, her armor flashing in the lantern light, and strode back toward the queen's throne. She didn't even look back to see if he was following, but the guards behind him made sure he did. As they walked, the scribe stayed close, whispering explanations in broken English. "You must complete the trials, 3 tests of strength, cunning, and loyalty. If you succeed, you will be bound to the princess. If you fail, the law will strip you of honor." Daniel's throat was dry. "And what happens if I just say no?" The scribe's eyes darted to the guards, then back to him. "No one says no." When they reached the front of the hall, the queen lifted a ceremonial spear as tall as a tree. She pointed it toward Daniel, her voice ringing out like a drumbeat. The scribe translated quickly. "Your first trial begins at dawn. Prepare yourself, human." The crowd erupted into cheers and laughter. Though Daniel could hear the undertone, most of them didn't believe he would live past the first challenge. Arabella's violet eyes found his again, and for a moment neither of them looked away. Her smile was small but dangerous. Daniel realized then that this wasn't just about some strange tradition. She wanted to see him try, she wanted to watch him struggle, and maybe, just maybe, she wanted to see if he could surprise her. The morning sun spilled into the training courtyard, turning the black stone floor into a sheet of gold. Drums echoed through the palace, their deep rhythm marking the start of the first trial. Daniel stood at the far end of the hall, his stomach tight, his palms still sore from the previous day's practice. 2 guards escorted him forward, their heavy boots pounding the floor in perfect sync. The great hall was already filled. Nobles sat in curved rows above the central platform, their armor flashing under the light of hanging crystal globes. The queen sat on her throne, her gaze steady and unreadable. Arabella stood beside her, dressed in full battle armor once again, her spear resting casually against her shoulder. She didn't speak, but her eyes followed him as he approached. At the center of the platform lay the object of his trial, a ceremonial war spear. It was longer than any weapon Daniel had ever seen, nearly twice his height, its shaft made of some dark polished metal and tipped with a wide gleaming blade. 2 smaller spikes extended from the base, making it impossible to rest on the ground without it tipping. It looked impossibly heavy. An elder stepped forward, holding a carved staff. "By the law of binding words," the scribe translated beside him, "you will now lift this spear and carry it across the great hall to the queen's dais. If you drop it, you fail. If you cannot move it, you fail. If you set it down before reaching the throne, you fail." Daniel swallowed. The spear didn't just look heavy. It looked like it had been designed to make carrying it miserable. He stepped forward, testing the weight with his hands. His arms strained instantly. The balance was all wrong. If he lifted it straight up, the tip would dip and crash into the floor. The crowd watched in silence. Somewhere high above, Daniel caught the sound of a noble laughing quietly. He glanced toward Arabella. She was watching closely, her expression calm but her eyes sharp as though memorizing every movement he made. Daniel knew brute strength wouldn't save him. He had seen the giant warriors train. This spear was sized for them, not for him. But weight could be managed if balanced properly. He knelt, ignoring the whispers from the crowd, and began adjusting his grip. He shifted his hands further apart, lowering one closer to the bottom spike while the other held the shaft just beneath the blade. When he lifted again, the spear tilted less wildly. It was still heavy. His shoulders ached immediately, but it was possible to hold without tipping over. He took one careful step forward. The metal blade caught the light, casting a sharp reflection across the floor. Every movement was slow and deliberate. He leaned the shaft slightly against his shoulder, letting his body carry some of the weight. His boots scuffed against the stone, but the spear stayed balanced. Murmurs rippled through the hall. He wasn't collapsing under the weight. Halfway across, his arms began to shake. Sweat slid down his back. The queen's throne seemed impossibly far away. He adjusted again, shifting his stance so the lower spike brushed against his thigh, letting it carry part of the load. It hurt, but it worked. Then, without warning, a sharp clang rang out. One of the nobles had tossed a small metal ornament onto the floor in his path. The crowd laughed softly. Daniel realized this wasn't going to be a fair trial. They wanted to see him stumble. He took a deep breath and stepped over the object, keeping his eyes on the queen. His legs burned, but his grip held firm. Every step was slower than the last, but his pace never broke. He heard the drums grow louder, each beat pushing him forward. Finally, the base of the dais was in front of him. 2 more steps, and he would reach the queen. His arms felt like fire. The spear's blade wavered slightly, and a few voices in the crowd rose in anticipation of his failure. He gritted his teeth, leaned forward, and took the last steps. He lowered the spear onto the 2 golden rests before the throne. The metal rang softly against them. For a heartbeat, the hall was silent. Then the queen rose, her voice carrying through the chamber. The scribe's translation followed instantly. "The human completes the first trial." The crowd erupted in mixed voices. Some clapped politely, others muttered in disappointment. Daniel stepped back, his chest rising and falling fast. His arms throbbed, but he didn't let it show. Arabella's gaze met his again. This time her expression was not the same calm mask. It was something sharper, more focused. She gave the faintest nod, almost as if she approved. As the queen dismissed the court, Daniel was led away by the guards. He didn't feel like a victor, not yet, but he knew one thing. They had expected him to fail in front of everyone, and he hadn't. That small victory was enough to keep him walking tall, even as his body screamed for rest. Daniel's arms still ached from the weight of the war spear as he sat on the edge of the oversized bed in his chamber. The trial was over, but his heart hadn't slowed much since. He had walked into the great hall expecting humiliation, yet somehow he'd walked out with whispers in the air. Whispers that maybe the human wasn't as weak as they thought. The door opened without a knock. Arabella stepped inside, still in her armor, though the ceremonial helmet was gone. Her long braid rested over her shoulder, the silver beads clinking softly as she moved. She closed the door behind her and studied him for a moment without speaking. "You survived," she said finally, her voice calm but edged with something else, curiosity. Daniel looked up at her. "You sound disappointed." Her eyes narrowed. "I am surprised. You are not built for our weapons, yet you carried one through the hall. You could have dropped it and ended this before it began. Why didn't you?" Daniel stood, meeting her gaze, even though he had to tilt his head far back to do so. "Because everyone in that hall wanted to see me fail. I wasn't going to give them the satisfaction." For a heartbeat, her lips twitched, almost like she wanted to smile. "You speak as if you were born here, human, but you are not. You don't understand our ways, our laws. You should have begged for mercy the moment you learned of the trials." Daniel crossed his arms. "Maybe I don't like begging." The faintest laugh escaped her. "You are either very brave or very foolish." She took a step closer, her shadow falling over him. "But bravery and foolishness are both dangerous here. Tomorrow will not be like today. Strength alone will not save you." He frowned. "Then what will?" Her eyes lingered on his for a long moment before she turned away. "You will learn soon enough." She walked toward the door, but paused with her hand on the frame. Without looking back, she said, "Do not think that because you impressed me once, you will do it again so easily." Then she was gone, the door closing behind her. Daniel sat back down, staring at the empty space she'd left. She was unlike anyone he had ever met, proud, intimidating, and yet there was something in her eyes when she spoke to him. It wasn't just challenge. It was curiosity, maybe even respect, though she would never admit it. That evening, a guard came to escort him to the lower courtyard. The air outside was cooler, the sky streaked with the deep blues and purples of approaching night. Torches lit the stone walls, casting long shadows across the training grounds. The scarred warrior who had trained him before stepped forward. "You did well today," he said in the alien tongue. The scribe translated beside him. "But tomorrow's trial is different. It is not about carrying weight. It is about the hunt." Daniel raised an eyebrow. "The hunt?" The scribe's expression was grim. "You will be sent into the palace hunting grounds. You must bring back the pelt of a shadow beast before dawn." Daniel had no idea what a shadow beast was, but the tone in the scribe's voice made it clear. This was no harmless animal. The trainer tossed him a small blade, barely longer than his hand. "This is all you will have." Daniel turned the weapon over in his hand, testing its balance. "You expect me to fight something dangerous with this?" The scribe shook his head. "We expect you to die with it. That is what they think will happen." Daniel's grip tightened around the hilt. "Then I'll just have to disappoint them again." The trainer chuckled darkly, clearly amused. "We will see, human. We will see." Later, back in his chamber, Daniel lay awake, staring at the high ceiling. He thought of the crowd's laughter, of Aravella's piercing gaze, of the queen's unreadable expression. He thought about the law that had trapped him here, and about the fact that every trial was designed to break him. But he also thought about the moment in the hall when the spear had touched the golden rests and the room had fallen silent. That silence had been his victory. It had been small, but it was his. He closed his eyes, already planning. If tomorrow's trial was about hunting, then brute strength wouldn't help him. He would need to use his mind, his instincts. He didn't know what a shadow beast looked like, but he knew one thing. It wouldn't be expecting a human to play by the same rules as the giant warriors. Somewhere deep in the palace, the drums sounded again, slower now, marking the hours until dawn. The The sound echoed through the stone walls, a reminder that the next trial was coming. Daniel rolled onto his side, his hands still resting on the small blade. Whatever waited for him in the hunting grounds, he would face it. Not because the law demanded it, but because every time they expected him to fail, he wanted to prove them wrong. The gates to the palace hunting grounds creaked open, revealing a dense forest bathed in silver moonlight. The air was cool and heavy with the smell of damp earth. Daniel stepped forward, the small blade tucked into his belt, the golden collar still around his neck. Behind him, a row of giant warriors stood watching from a tall stone platform. Among them was Aravella, her arms crossed, her gaze sharp. The elder's voice echoed from above, translated through a scribe at Daniel's side. "Bring back the pelt of a shadow beast before dawn, human. Failure will end your trials." Daniel glanced toward the dark trees ahead. What exactly is a shadow beast? The scribe's answer was short, fast, silent, teeth like blades. Even our warriors tread carefully here. The gates shut behind him with a deep metallic thud. The sound seemed to seal him inside another world. The forest swallowed the light quickly, the moon fading behind twisting branches. Strange noises came from the undergrowth, clicking, low growls, the distant rustle of something moving fast. Daniel didn't rush in blindly. Instead, he crouched near a thick tree and waited, letting his eyes adjust to the dim light. The air was cold enough to make his breath visible. Every shadow seemed alive. Minutes passed before he saw movement, a sleek, low shape gliding between the trees. It was almost invisible, its fur so dark it seemed to drink in the moonlight. Only its eyes gave it away, faintly glowing blue in the darkness. The creature stopped, sniffing the air. Daniel stayed perfectly still, letting his heart slow. When it moved again, he followed at a distance, stepping only where the forest floor was soft with moss. The beast moved with a strange grace, its muscles shifting under its dark pelt. He noticed something else. It wasn't hunting him. It was stalking something deeper in the forest. Daniel crept closer, watching as it pounced suddenly, taking down a smaller animal in seconds. The speed was incredible. Charging in with his little blade would be suicide. He needed a different plan. Looking around, he spotted a low branch thick enough to hold his weight. Quietly, he climbed up and began cutting long vines from nearby trees. His idea was risky, but it was the only chance he had. Working quickly, he fashioned a snare. 2 loops of vine tied to a bent branch that would snap upward when triggered. He smeared the smaller animal's blood on the ground near it, then retreated into the shadows. It didn't take long. The shadow beast returned, drawn by the scent. It moved cautiously at first, then lunged toward the bait. The snare whipped tight around its hind legs, yanking it off balance. The creature thrashed, snarling, its glowing eyes locked on him. Daniel moved in carefully, keeping low. "Easy, I don't want to kill you," he muttered under his breath. The beast growled, but the snare held firm. He knelt, and instead of striking, cut only a section of its thick pelt. The fur was softer than he expected and warm. Once he had enough to satisfy the trial, he cut the vines and stepped back. The beast didn't attack. It just stood there, staring at him, as if trying to understand why he'd spared its life. Then it turned and slipped back into the shadows without a sound. Daniel made his way back toward the gates, the pelt slung over his shoulder. The forest noises followed him, but nothing else moved to block his path. When the gates finally opened, the crowd leaned forward, eager to see the outcome. He stepped out into the torchlight, holding the pelt high. Gasps rippled through the spectators. Aravella's eyes widened slightly, not just at the fact that he had returned, but that he wasn't injured. The scarred trainer leaned toward another warrior, muttering something in disbelief. The queen's voice carried across the courtyard, the scribe repeating the words for him. "The human has passed the second trial." As the crowd reacted, some cheering, others grumbling, Daniel caught Aravella's gaze. For the first time, her expression softened just enough for him to see a flicker of something that wasn't challenge or amusement. Respect, maybe? But as he turned to leave the courtyard, the elder's voice stopped him. "Tomorrow the trials end, and so will your fate, one way or another." Daniel didn't answer. He only tightened his grip on the pelt and walked back to his chamber, already wondering what the final trial would demand of him. The night before the final trial, the palace felt different. The halls were quieter, the guards more alert, and the air seemed charged with tension. Daniel sat in his chamber, the shadow beast pelt folded neatly beside him. He had no idea what tomorrow would bring, only that it would decide whether he walked out of this palace alive or remained here forever under their law. The door opened, and Aravella stepped inside. She wasn't wearing armor this time, this only a long, dark robe that flowed behind her as she moved. Her hair was still braided, the silver beads catching the torchlight. She closed the door without a word and walked toward him. "You have done better than I expected," she said, her voice low. "Many of my own warriors have failed one of the first 2 trials. You passed both." Daniel leaned back slightly. "And you're here to congratulate me?" Her lips curved into the faintest smirk. "No, I am here to tell you that tomorrow will not be something you can win with tricks or clever thinking alone. The final trial is a test of loyalty. The Queen will give a royal command. You will obey, no matter what it is." Daniel frowned. "And if I don't?" She stepped closer, her shadow falling over him. "Then you will have insulted the Queen in front of her court. There is only one punishment for that." He didn't have to ask what it was. Her eyes held his for a moment longer, then she turned toward the door. Before leaving, she glanced back. "The law binds us both now. Remember that." Sleep didn't come easily. He kept thinking about what kind of command could be so important, and why Aravella had looked almost uneasy when she spoke of it. When dawn came, the drums sounded again, deep and slow, guiding him toward the great hall. The place was full. Every noble, every warrior, every servant who could find a place to stand. The Queen sat tall on her throne, her gaze fixed on him as he approached. Aravella stood to her right, armored again, her face unreadable. Daniel stopped before the throne. The scribe stepped forward, ready to translate. The Queen's voice rang out across the hall. "You have carried the war spear. You have hunted the shadow beast. You have not broken." The scribe repeated her words in English. "Now you will face the last test, the royal command." She paused, letting the silence stretch. "You will serve as the companion and protector of my daughter Aravella. You will live in her chambers, train with her, and share her duties, and her bed. From this day forward, you are bound to her until death or dismissal." A ripple of reaction spread through the hall, some surprised, some amused, some clearly jealous. Daniel's heart pounded. He had expected something dangerous, but not this. Refusing wasn't an option. He knew that much. But agreeing meant stepping into a life he had never wanted or planned for. The scribe looked at him carefully. "You must answer now. Do you accept the royal command?" Daniel's eyes flicked toward Aravella. She was watching him closely, her expression calm, but there was something in her eyes, something he couldn't name. Was it pride? Curiosity? A warning? He took a deep breath. "I accept," he said clearly. The Queen nodded once, satisfied. The hall erupted into loud cheers, the pounding of spears against the floor echoing like thunder. Aravella stepped forward, taking his hand in hers. Her grip was strong, almost crushing, but her voice was low when she spoke. "You have no idea what you just agreed to." The rest of the ceremony blurred by. Nobles came forward to speak words he couldn't understand. Servants draped him in a new cloak, the deep red color marking his new status. By the time the crowd began to disperse, his head was spinning. Aravella led him through a different set of corridors than he had used before. These halls were quieter, lined with tall windows that let in the morning light. At the end stood a pair of massive doors carved with intricate patterns. She pushed them open, revealing a chamber almost the size of his entire home on Earth. The space was filled with heavy furniture, weapon racks, and a raised platform with a wide bed covered in thick furs. Daniel took a slow step inside. "So, this is your room?" She closed the doors behind them. "Our room, now." He turned to face her. "You wanted this?" Her gaze was steady. "The Queen wanted it, but I am not displeased. You have shown strength and wit, and you are not afraid to speak back to me. That is rare." Daniel couldn't tell if that was a compliment or a warning. She walked past him, removing her helmet and setting it on a stand. "You will learn quickly. Life at my side will be nothing like the trials. There will be no clear victories or defeats, only survival." She looked over her shoulder, her violet eyes locking on his. "And if you prove yourself again, you might find that the law binding us is not the only thing keeping you here." The days after the royal command were strange for Daniel. He no longer lived in a small chamber guarded by others. Now he shared the vast quarters of Arabella herself. Every morning, he woke to the sound of her moving about the room, the clink of armor and the scrape of sharpening blades. She treated him neither like a prisoner nor like an equal. Instead, she tested him constantly. Training was harsh. Arabella pushed him to exhaustion with drills, sparring, and obstacle runs across the palace grounds. Sometimes she mocked him when he struggled. Other times she silently observed, her sharp eyes catching every small improvement he made. Daniel learned to read her mood by the way she tightened her braid or adjusted her armor straps. But the bond between them began to shift. During meals, she started asking him about Earth, about how humans fought wars, built cities, and treated leaders. He noticed how she listened more than she spoke, storing away every detail. At night, when the palace was quiet, she sometimes set aside her spear and sat near the window, watching the stars. Daniel would sit beside her, and for a few moments they spoke not as princess and human, but as two people curious about each other's worlds. One evening, the peace broke. A horn sounded from the outer wall, sharp and urgent. Arabella was already moving before Daniel could ask what was happening. "Stay here," she ordered, but he ignored her, grabbing the short blade she had given him days earlier. They raced through the palace corridors to the outer courtyard. The gates were under attack, strange armored figures forcing their way in. Daniel saw alien guards falling under the assault. The enemy moved fast, their weapons glowing with an unnatural light. Arabella leapt into the fight, her spear a blur of steel. She moved like a storm, striking down attackers with precise, devastating blows. Daniel kept to her side, blocking strikes and driving his blade into the gaps of enemy armor when he could. It was chaos. Shouts, metal ringing against metal, the smell of smoke and burning oil. At one point, an enemy fighter broke through the line and charged straight for Arabella's unguarded back. Daniel didn't think. He lunged, slamming into the attacker and knocking them to the ground. The alien rolled away, but Daniel's quick action had saved her from a strike she hadn't seen coming. For the first time in battle, Arabella looked at him with open shock. "You," she started. But another wave of enemies cut her off. The fighting raged until reinforcements from the city arrived, pushing the attackers back through the gates. As the last of them fled into the night, the palace guards began shouting orders and tending to the wounded. Arabella turned to Daniel, her armor streaked with dust and blood. "You could have stayed behind. You should have, but you didn't." Daniel wiped his blade on a fallen enemy's cloak. "I told you, I'm not here to fail, and I don't leave people behind." Her violet eyes held his for a long moment. Then she stepped closer, lowering her voice so only he could hear. "You may not realize it yet, human, but tonight you have done more than pass a trial. You have earned a place by my side that no law can force." That night, the queen held a private gathering in the throne room. Only high-ranking nobles and the warriors who had fought at the gates were present. When the queen called Daniel forward, the hall was silent. She spoke in her deep, commanding voice, the scribe translating each word. "By courage and loyalty, he has proven himself worthy not only of my daughter's command, but of my court's respect." The queen lifted a ceremonial band of silver and placed it around Daniel's arm. "From this day, you are not a guest or a captive. You are of the royal guard, bound to the princess by honor, not just law." The hall erupted in applause. Daniel stood there, feeling the weight of the silver band on his arm. This wasn't what he had imagined when he first stepped into this palace, but somehow it felt right. Later, back in their quarters, Arabella stood at the window again, looking out over the city. She spoke without turning. "You could leave now if you wanted. The queen would let you go." Daniel stepped beside her. "Maybe I could, but I won't." She finally looked at him, and for the first time her expression was unguarded. "Then it seems human that your first words to me, those binding words, were not a mistake after all." They stood together in silence, while the silver band catching the faint light of the stars, the air between them no longer filled with challenge, but with something unspoken, something that felt like the beginning of trust.